Hello, friends, and welcome back to r/ProRevenge. Let's start our video with a story in which the main villain of the workplace was a real witch. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you're new here and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new video every single day. Here we go. I need to fix the mess of others? Enjoy your unemployment. A few years back, I was working for a data cabling DC company and did a lot of work for a big business, BB, in their very large factory. DC had 3 groups of technicians and thus 3 managers. Mine was very nice, but one group was managed by the witch, who liked to hang around and make her presence known even when not needed. A few more important details. Since BB had so many contractors and competing contracts, we had to always fill out 2 timesheets, one for BB describing the work we did in their terms so DC could get paid, and one for DC for items not in the contract with BB, drive time, cleanup, delays, etc. One particular day, 2 groups of technicians were called to an area of the factory where we just completed some work. Witch started screaming about how terrible we were and that this kind of sloppy work was not acceptable. Even something about fixing it on our own time. Lucky for us, our main competitor used an unusual colored zip tie, and I was able to bring this to the attention of my manager while Witch was losing her mind. While Witch was catching her breath, my manager pointed this fact out to her, and I was able to show Witch the work we did, although in the same general area, not the same path, and I also cheerfully added how nice and clean our work looked. This only seemed to enrage Witch, as if this was the first time she was wrong in her entire life and could not handle that being on record. She started to leave and turned around red-faced and sweaty and screamed, "I don't care if it's not our work, we need to clean up their work so we don't get called out by BB." As the senior manager of the group, she made it very clear that she had the final say. So, with so much work going on all over the factory, there was plenty of opportunity to clean up cables, and my group started adding 30 to 45 minutes per job on our DC timesheet for this compliance, since there was no code for us to get paid by BB for this work. This large amount of work also delayed our billing department from seeing this for about 6 weeks. Our group was called in to explain our timesheets, and fortunately all the managers were there to hear our story. As we started explaining the hundreds of man-hours and supplies we were wasting, my manager corroborated our instructions from Witch and had documentation to show that Witch approved this time and material. Billing went to corporate with tens of thousands of lost dollars and put it all on Witch, who was promptly fired. And our second story. Accusing me of something I didn't do? Pay me forever. This story took place in 2007, but still pays off, quite literally. I'm from Brazil, meaning different legislation. I worked as an IT assistant in the education area. It was a good job, excellent work hours, and the team was great. The school was a very small one, owned and directed by husband, wife, and some other family. My job was initially as an IT assistant, which means hardware and software stuff, but since there was no senior IT, I was the IT. Not really a problem, since the demands for me was basically editing documents and maintaining the website. This was 2003 and things were good. Fast forward 4 years, I'm still IT assistant but in charge of 2 interns, systems maintenance, IT security, user support, and all the publicity. Again, all good since I had the time to study and work in another place repairing hardware. One day the owner's wife called me into her office. I noticed rage in her face. She was red as a tomato, and when I entered the room, she closed the door and started screaming, "OP, you're stealing from the school! Look at these reports from accounting. You're not billing these students. You're stealing from my family." Her face red and angry expression completed a very disturbing scene from a 50-year-old small and fat woman. She gave me the reports and I murmured, "Okay, I'll have to look into that." She starts to scream again, "You don't even realize what I'm talking about. This is what happens when you don't pay attention to your work. Go on and give me some answers on how much you cost us." I say, "Okay, I'll have to look into that," and leave her office. With the report in hands, I start to calculate and found some inconsistency. The process was very simple. I generated the invoices and the accounting director, her brother, had to authorize the batch to send to the bank. If the bank found any inconsistency, they return to the system and the director has to authorize, or not, Sometimes we'd edit the values for discount, calculation errors, or typos, things like that. Since I didn't have the access to this part of the system, I took the blame since I couldn't explain how that happened. Life goes on. One day, months later of the episode, the computer god smiled at me. The accounting director asked me to help him. OP, I'm getting this stupid red flag on these names. I don't know what it is. Solve it so I can confirm and send the invoice to the bank. Normally, I click on the names and then click yes and the flags go away. It's not working. I clicked and the message was, "Do you confirm canceling this invoice?" I stared at him and asked, "You really click yes every month?" He confirms. I explained that he should choose no to send the invoice back to me. He thanked me and I began my evil plan. You know, when you're the only IT from somewhere, 3 things the owners should keep in mind. 1, the control of all the passwords. 2, the control of the processes from IT. 3, the patience that IT requires. We are problem solvers on caffeine and hate. We don't sleep. We're fed by light. We are Legion. The plan was simple. Make the business more and more automated and IT dependent, which on a normal business would be very good news, but it was not. Since no one knows at this school how important IT is, remember that I was still an assistant, even doing all the job. I made sure that all the processes were automated. For that entire year, I busted my butt working in methods to put all the processes in automatic pilot. I created some cool bots, Python for the interested, to integrate the systems and almost no human interaction. In 2008, I ended the automation process and quit. The school was kind of happy functioning without an IT person, and for an entire year, all was good. One day in 2009, I get a call from the other owner, the husband. "OP, we're having a problem in the system. Could you fix it?" You know, I hold grudges, and this was my time to glow. "Hey, Mr. Owner, I can fix it. I'll charge you $100. Is that good for you?" "Yes, OP." After fixing what was wrong, I advise you should hire an IT person or outsourcing IT. He says okay. 1 month later, again he calls. "There's another problem with the new printer. Can you fix it?" "Yep, it's $200. Okay. Since they didn't do anything about it, I offered a malicious contract to help the school for $1,000 a month and $150 extra for any visit. They agreed. Fast forward, it's 2021 and they still don't have an IT department. They still pay me $2,000 a month plus $250 extra per visit, and the computer system works like a charm. The accounting director knows that I know he did wrong in the past. They don't talk about it. The owner's wife knows that I know that her brother is a stupid account director, and if I open my mouth, he'd have to be fired. They don't talk about it. The owner tried to change the automation system. The cost is prohibitive. The system that I made is free for them to use, but if they want a manual, there's a cost. Since I was an IT assistant, not a programmer, the manual is in the program font. But to know this, they have to contract an IT person, which they won't. We don't need to talk about it. Now I have a contract, don't do practically anything, and they're obligated to pay me since they don't have the knowledge and are afraid of me. And if they want to change anything, I'll have to look into that. And our last story. How my grandfather got a mansion near the lake almost for free. I heard this story from my father, and it's about my grandfather. Let's get to the background. Once upon a time, in his youth, my grandfather and his friend worked in the mine. The friend we'll call Frank. Over a few years of working, about 10, they were able to earn and buy a piece of land near a lake which they shared between the two of them. There they eventually also built 2 small houses to come there for holidays. By the time my grandfather was already married to my grandmother and was expecting his first daughter, and Frank had just started dating his future wife. Unfortunately, his future wife turned out to be Mega Karen. But then again, if that hadn't happened, we wouldn't have this story. Karen was the daughter of the local prosecutor, and her family owned several other stores in our town. Mega Karen treated all of Frank's friends as if they were lower class, with contrived arrogance and outright contempt. And more than Frank's friends, she hated only her sisters and brothers, with whom she constantly quarreled. Grandpa didn't understand how Frank could live with such a person, but Frank was married to Karen in 6 months and left his old job and started working in Karen's family business. From then on, Karen constantly started saying that the windows of our house looked out the side and that my family was watching her in the evening. Then my grandfather put up a little fence between their lands. A few months later, Karen's son Richard was born. Frank started seeing my grandfather much less often, and my grandfather noticed that he was getting more and more sullen, as if he had a grudge against my grandfather. There was less and less contact, and then Karen and Frank moved to another town to run another family store. No one came to Frank's lake house after that for a very long time. After about 25 years, my grandfather found out Frank died because he drank like a demon all that time and lived together with Mega Karen, which also affects the lifespan. Another 9 years later, Richard, Karen's son, came to Frank's dilapidated lake house. He immediately offered to sell my grandfather his poor hovel for about half the market price, since Richard wants to tear down the two houses and build a large mansion by the lake. As you can imagine, my grandfather, with all the politeness of a lifelong miner who's invested a lot in the house, told him to go F himself. Richard was furious and began to threaten that he had connections in the prosecutor's office, but this conversation went nowhere. Then he offered to give another quarter of the price on top. My grandfather offered to add another quarter off the top to go F himself. So a week later, Richard brought in a crew of builders who tore down Frank's old house and started building a mansion a foot away from the fence. The house was built pretty quickly with only the interior finishing left to be done, and then Richard wanted to tear down my grandfather's fence and put a wall twice as high there. Obviously, my old grandfather was opposed and once again told Richard to go F himself, so Richard waited until my grandparents were gone for a couple days, took down the fence, and started building a new one. Grandpa came back and immediately sued him. Richard thought he could cover it up because of his connections in the prosecutor's office, but there was one thing he didn't know. Luckily, my grandfather didn't know about it either, because he could have acted earlier and ruined the whole surprise. When the surveyors, or I don't know exactly what the profession's called, came to inspect the land, they pulled out the old project, and suddenly it turned out that the property line didn't run the same way as the fence. It runs a little bit on a slope. So Frank's lot had a lot more land closer to the lake, and my grandfather's lot narrowed toward the lake and widened to where our house was, and now part of Richard's mansion. That's before the two little houses were each on their own land, but now Richard built part of his house on my grandfather's land. And now we have this situation. Richard had to either demolish half of his new house and compensate my grandfather for the inconvenience, or negotiate with my grandfather to buy that part of the land where there was already his house and also compensate for the inconvenience, which my grandfather would not go to no money. Or sell my grandfather a much cheaper house and out of court to agree on a solution. By the way, my father now lives in the mansion, so I think you guessed at what option Richard went to get back some of his money. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.